Okay. Okay. Got it. All right. How's everybody doing?
Wonderful.
Good. 27 participants. Holy cow. All right. Whoops. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Somebody's got something going on there. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay. All right, good. Good. So let me get out of this thing here. All right. Probably fairly short meeting today. We'll see what I've got to talk about here and see how much input we get here. But today's comments from the last meeting, see if we have any of those, any DMS issues. The DPE WG document, I think I sent that copy of that to everybody. We're going to discuss that a little bit. Some other airworthiness issues. Today's kind of main topic is testing the sub-elements on the knowledge section of Aries operation. How many do we test for each one of those, and what does including mean versus knows instructor or knows knowledge of? Point of contact reports, talk about the AFM POH dates on when those things apply, and some varying malfunctions. So first things first, any comments from the last meeting? None? Okay, there we go. There we go. Any DMS issues? None? Okay. All right. I sent this to everybody, this DPE WG document. This is not in any way associated with our group here. It went up on the FAA.gov website a few weeks ago. And it was unbeknownst to me. I didn't know anything about it being put together. I was working with, as Larry Taylor and Joe Tilly, Bobby Bollock, we were working with one of the names you saw in there, Susan Parsons, with the CFI ACS, and very little on the instructor DPE, I mean the DPE code of conduct that goes along with the other code of conducts. But and Scottsdale didn't know anything about it until I sent it to them. And from what, Craig, are you on? Craig.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I
Okay.
was on a different screen with my mouse.
So, yeah, I'll just let Craig have a little bourbon here. We talked about it this morning. It was going to be more discussion, but Craig, just give us a little insight into what you know.
Yeah, all I was able to find out was, and you're correct, Phil. I didn't know, I wasn't aware of it until you brought it to my attention. I went to some of the FAA folks, and the only thing I was able to find out was that it was mistakenly posted. It shouldn't have been posted yet. This has been put on hold for a while.
Yeah, so I was going to have a little bit more to say about it. There's a couple parts of it that I'll bring up here, but I don't know if you all had a chance to read it. It was in some interesting reading, and it's obviously not in effect. It was just a proposal for some things, but one of the things that I did like about it was this section here. If anybody saw this, it was questions and concerns about these items right here that would definitely need to be answered and would help us a lot and keep us a little bit more standardized in how we interpret things like, our DME arcs required, is the landing from a circling approach required? Should we test on flight instruments that are not in the aircraft brought to the check ride? Things like that. And then the other page of that was this one right here. Obviously no instruction during the flight, but how do we fail the PFD and MFDs on those aircraft? And does an RCAP be published or to be tested? Should the applicant be evaluated on how long it takes to set up and enter approaches and holds? But anyway, does anyone have any comments on what they read in the document?
I'll
No.
chime in real quick and just say I'm glad they're doing it. I mean, just looking at the list of people that are in this working group, I think they did a good job getting people from all over the country. And a lot of these questions are things that we've asked our own FSDO, and we have a definitive answer, but there's another FSDO somewhere else that gives a different answer. And especially now where you have DPs traveling to do tests, I would love for the FAA. I think all of us would, even including our local FSDO, would love for the FAA to take give a solid answer to these questions.
Yeah, I think it's great too. One of the concerns, I know that this isn't policy yet, and they
No, it does not.
put it out too soon, was the comment about 3 full check rides a day and up to 6 events a day. So we're going to try to find out where they came up with the data to say that 6 events, not full check rides, obviously, could be accomplished in one day. Kind of curious how they came up with that number. But anyway, I was going to have more of a discussion about it, but after chatting with Craig and realizing that this thing wasn't really meant to be posted, we'll save that for another time. But if anybody has any comments regarding what they read, I think it'd be okay to send those to the authors of the document. And maybe that's something that they're looking for as well, is what the troops out there have to say about it. Any other comments regarding that? Oh, okay. So once again, with airworthiness, I got a couple phone calls from some of the DPEs on, is this airplane airworthy? Be careful about things that are attached to the panel kind of in a permanent way with bolts and screws and things like that. So just pay close attention to that. Any doubt whatsoever, obviously check with an A&P or Ernie, of course, will always help us with that if you can get a hold of them at the time that you're doing that. And once again, stickers being placed on propellers or other aerodynamic surfaces not considered airworthy. So, and any placards, make sure that the placards should be seen in there are correct and they're not missing or covered up. Sometimes we see some that are scratched out. Any comments there?
Phil, this is Kerry. Ernie had a good article in his maintenance quarterly newsletter about the vinyl wraps as well. And one of the examples he had was a vinyl wrap on the prop spinner. So
Right.
It's not just stickers, but vinyl wraps can also be non-airworthy.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm starting to see more of that on some aircraft instead of the paint. People are putting vinyl wraps as they're doing on cars with advertisements and things like that. Thanks.
Yeah, the important thing is that,
Oh, there you are.
yeah, no unauthorized stickers are allowed on the propeller at all. The wrap article was about doing vinyl shrink wrap as a replacement or substitution for painting the airplane. If you don't have engineering data, then it is not legal. That does not count the decals. There is a method in 4313-1B that tells you how to install decals, and decals don't cover the majority of the aircraft, don't go on flight controls, etc. So it's important to distinguish between wrap and decal, and it's also important to understand that nothing goes on a propeller that's not authorized by manual.
Got it. Thanks, Ernie.
Yep.
Any other comments on that article? Oh. Okay. The testing of sub-elements on the knowledge section, areas of operation. So how many do we test and what are some examples of them? So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I think everybody does know. When we look here at the appendix part of the ACS there, it mentions that the task includes sub-elements. Some of them do. The evaluator may select an appropriate sub-element. Example on the performance limitation ones would be weight and balance. Any tasks requiring evaluation of more than one sub-element are annotated accordingly. And I'm going to give you an example of that here. So operations of systems, if you look there at the note, you'll notice it says if K1 is selected, you must assess the knowledge of at least 3 of the following sub-elements. So that one stated pretty clearly that if you do select K1, you're going to do 3 of them. But what we see in some of these other ones here, like cross-country flight planning, where you see K3 with K3A, B, and C. So my question to the group is, if we do K3, do we do all three of the sub-elements if we happen to select that, or are we okay with just one or two of them? Anyone?
My understanding is if you select K3, then you have to select at least one of the sub-elements.
Okay, and I would agree with that. The problem is that unlike the other area of operation there or task, it doesn't make the note like this one here does that says note. If K1 is selected, you must select 3. So we have another one here like this one here, airworthiness requirements. So applicant demonstrates the understanding of. So at K1, we have 4 sub-elements. Would we be interpreting that the same way, that if we select K1, we have to do at least one of them, or do we need to do all 4 of them?
Wow.
I would agree that you have to select at least one of them because K1 says including, and it has the bracket. So I would say you'd have to select at least one of the sub-elements.
Well, that's one explanation. The other one was, it says including, it doesn't say, you're going to see another one that says such as, but it says including, and once again, it doesn't say select 3 of them, but including, does including mean just one? Or does it mean all 4?
And there's another one down there that says to include. So is including different than to
know.
include?
Oh, I'm getting to that one. So this is an issue that I'm
Give us an answer, Phil. We'll do whatever you want, man.
no, it's not what Phil wants. What I'm trying to do is I've had people ask questions about this. Well, this examiner does all of these things, and this examiner only does one of them. So in my endeavors here to try to get a consensus from the group and for our visitors, the instructors that are on here, obviously everything needs to be taught. It's not like we just teach one of the things. We got to teach everything as instructors. But just trying to get a feel for how these are being interpreted, because we've now seen 3 different versions. We've seen, must select at least 3. Then we've seen including, and then you go down to K3 there, and it says to include. So I'm not actually expecting an answer today. What I'm doing is putting something out there that we probably want to try to get a little bit more standardized on how we want to interpret that for the benefit of those people that are getting our applicants ready. Someone else have a comment? No. Okay. And then this one here, airspace system, it just says, the applicant demonstrates understanding of, and in this one here, you simply just pick one. Or
Hey,
let
Phil, can you go back to the previous slide?
I sure can.
So I'll just give you an explanation for my rationale on this. Is when you go into the appendix, it states that only one knowledge area and one risk area must be selected. And in this case, like when you're looking at this, you could select only K1B and do that, and that would meet the requirement in the appendix. So I don't think the intention, at least in my opinion, meant that if you selected K1, you'd have to do A through D. I think it was meant that you could do K1C or you could do K1 plus another one. I don't think it meant the other way around. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, let me go back to what you just were talking about there. So so when we look at like performance limitations, weight and balance is one of the items. So in that case, they gave an example where weight and balance was the only one selected. So I would tend to agree that that would be one way of looking at it. The issue was that we had to include or such as, or how did they put it here? Including and to include. I just wish they would have, use the same terminology so you could identify what needs to be done, or simply state only one of the sub-elements is required, just like they said all three of them are required for the other one.
Phil, so really the question is are those letters at the end part of a task, or are they a task? Like hypoxia, task is not the right word, element, right?
Element.
These are elements. Is hypoxia an element, or is hypoxia part of an element? That's the question. Hopefully the FAA has a clear answer. Hopefully they give it to us and we move on. The only thing I'll throw out there while we're waiting for the official answer is the fact that when we look at the written test report and the areas that are missed, those do include that last letter. It would have the K1 alpha or Bravo or Charlie. And our guidance is that if an element is listed on the written test report, then it must be tested at the practical test, and that may count for the one item from that task.
Yes.
So there's a logical way to go along with what Ryan is saying, which is that hypoxia is its own element. We cover it, we're good.
Mm-hmm. And then if you had a written test element that was failed, you would add that to it.
And that could count for the knowledge for that task if the examiner wants to do it that way.
Well, you're saying that if let's say they missed a question on hypoxia.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you have to include that in your plan of action.
Correct.
In this task right here. So you cover hypoxia. Did that also comply with the one element that was required by the appendix?
According to our guidance, yes, unless there's something I'm forgetting on the specific one, because we got to go read the appendix. There are specifics in there that talk about covering more than one, and I'd have to go check that because I did that when I made my plan of action.
Hey, Phil, I think in the skill section of that task, it says you have to cover at least 3 of
That's
those
what it
goals.
is. Yep. There's another great example.
I cut it off there because I just cut off the sub letters. So thanks for that. It does say you must cover at least 3 in the skill section.
As a skill. Yep. You're right. I remember that. The skill says cover at least 3 of those. So there's another, what are we up to 5 different ways that they present this?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's my fault there for not going down further. I simply just pulled up the sub elements here and the descriptor of this here. So that takes care of that one. Is there
Phil,
references to that in any of the other ones?
Phil, this is Josh.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
One other comment, that in the appendix of the ACS, when it describes skill, risk management, and knowledge elements, it specifically says, if the task includes sub-elements, the evaluator may select an appropriate sub-element. That means you have a choice. When they're designating sub-elements, it says the evaluator may select an appropriate sub-element.
Yeah, that's the section that I just had. I'll pull it up here real quick here. Right there.
Yeah, so I interpret that as
Just one of them.
What page is that, Josh?
one of them.
That's
Because-
that's in the appendix. That's in the appendix in the ACS, either private or commercial. This was out of the commercial, but it's in the appendix section of the ACS. And I think I want to say it's appendix number 5, I think.
So it reads an appropriate sub-element. It doesn't say all sub-elements. And then obviously it says specifically more than one sub-element are annotated accordingly. So
Okay.
I interpret that if they say an appropriate sub-element, that is one.
All right. So I get that. So what my next question is and has been is, if an individual, let's take that. Let's see, did I do performance? No, I didn't do that. Okay. If a person missed, well, let's do this one here. If a person missed a question on spatial disorientation, we already know we got to cover that, right? Is there another sub-element that needs to be covered as well? My understanding is that you have to cover at least one element from each one of those, plus anything missed on the test.
So the appendix says that you have to cover at least one sub-element, and that sub-element may be the item missed on the knowledge test. So in theory, if there's one sub-element, let's say K1C was missed on the knowledge test, you only have to cover that to cover the knowledge element for human factors. However, the examiner has the option to select more than just one.
Well, my next.
Well, but that, hold on, but that's one that has the skill. This is not a good example for that question, Phil, because skill 1 says to do at least 3.
Right.
The
So,
one with skills, right?
so let's pick a different example that doesn't have that skill.
All right, what does human factors have?
Let's see, hotel. That's what we're at right now. There's a skill for human factors that says associate the symptoms and effects for at least 3 of the conditions listed in K1A through K1I above with the causes and corrective action. So
That has 3 as well.
So let's go. Do you have a screenshot of operation of system? Well,
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
that one has a skill that says operate at least 3 of the systems.
Yeah, that one's
listed.
easy.
All right.
Because it says
Okay.
3. Take a look
So,
at cross-country flight planning.
all right, Delta. Yeah, get the right page here. All right, so that one does not specifically say. So the question is if item K3 alpha is listed on their written test report as a missed area, and so the examiner knows they need to do K3 alpha, time, climb and descent rates, et cetera. The question is, do we also have to test Bravo and Charlie? And what I've been doing is the same as what Josh and Ryan are talking about, which is, no, we just have to cover what was written, and that counts for the knowledge task, or what was missed on the written, and then it counts. So because there is not a skill that specifically says we have to go further.
Okay.
That's what you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Josh and Ryan, that's what you guys are saying, right?
I'm in agreement with that, Jim. I
Yeah,
agree.
I'm looking for it right now, but there's a section in the appendix that addresses that question specifically. I'm looking for it right now.
Agreed, and it does say it substitutes, you don't have to do an additional element.
Okay. Any other comments on that?
No, but it is a good reminder for any flight instructors that are watching this that to understand all skills must be done. So there's no surprise there. And of course, you need to prepare your applicants for all knowledge and all risk management because you don't know which ones we're going to pick.
Right. Well, the question came up because due to the difference in times for the orals, and one thing that I want to make sure we understand, and Jim, you kind of said it before, these are the minimums. This is the absolute minimum. It doesn't mean we just have to stop with one and call it a day. Plus, there are some times when you're going to get an answer that may want to direct you to another element or sub-element to see if they really have a complete understanding of it. Okay, any other comments there? Okay, point of contacts reports. Any, let's see, Jim, you're out there. Anything from Deer Valley?
Yeah, we mentioned it a little bit at the AFTW meeting, but just, with the runway closed at Scottsdale, everyone just needs to be extra careful. Deer Valley was busy enough, and now we've got all this extra jet traffic coming in and out for the next month and a half. So keep your head on a swivel. Don't assume that all jet pilots do things correctly.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that.
Carrie, are you still on?
Yes.
Do you want to, I've got your information here, but since you're there, do you want to just talk about the items that you mentioned to me?
All right. I mentioned that in the AFTW as well. The items was Tyler Howard mentioned that if you're up there doing the RNAV GPS to 2.5 without P50's approval, just make sure you're talking to somebody such as Deer Valley Tower. Let them know you're on the approach and that you're doing it in case they do have some of that jet traffic that's been diverted from Scottsdale coming into Deer Valley up behind you. And the other thing that Tyler has put out is the tower visits are now approved again. So if you're operating up at Deer Valley and you want to be able to visit the tower, make sure you contact them and you can get up there again.
Okay, and the other one I think was the North Test Track.
That was true. and Jim covered it pretty well in the AFTW meeting, but there have been reports from the north test track that's inside the SADR up there in the alert area, the northwest test track, of pilots doing low approaches. Some have even claimed they're doing touch and goes off the surface, but that's probably not happening. But just don't do it, because the people that own the test track aren't happy with it. So stay away from the northwest track test area if you're doing simulated engine failures.
Okay, thanks. Any of our other point of contacts there?
Hey, it's Jared. I'm here.
Jared, how you doing?
Good. Don't have a whole lot to report from Gateway or Chandler. Things are definitely slowed down for the summer, and all the schools' intakes, I think, are down right now. But one thing I have been seeing on a regular basis, for some reason, both private and commercial applicants, when we get to short field landings, we're reverting back to a lot of the simulated max braking callouts instead of actually doing them. So I've seen that enough that I've started making sure as part of my take before flight brief or pre-flight brief that they understand that they can't simulate those kind of things. They actually have to demonstrate them. And yeah, I continue to get the response, well, we never actually do that because it's against company policy and, wears on the brakes, whatever. And I make it clear, the ACS says you have to demonstrate those things, not just tell me you're going to simulate them. So I don't know if anybody else has seen that, but that's just kind of one thing I've seen the last couple months prop up on a regular basis.
Okay, and I think it's still been difficult trying to get across to them. We're not talking about slamming on the brakes.
Correct.
It's about maximum effective braking, and it doesn't have to be anywhere near. And obviously, if they're skidding the tires, two things happen: they did it wrong and they misunderstood what the concept. So any efforts we can make into explaining what that really means, and to see that the instructors in the schools can demonstrate what maximum effective braking is, and it's not anywhere near skidding tires.
Yeah.
It's not anywhere near that. So I don't know why the entities are concerned as much, unless it's just not being taught right, where they either think it's skidding the tires or saying maximum effective braking.
Yeah, right. And I still even have some applicants reach over. The first thing I do at the touchdown is reach over and raise the flaps, and we go back and we review the Cessna POH. Specifically says you apply the brakes first, and then get the flaps as you're able. So there's still a lot of confusion, I think, on some levels at some of the academies of how they should be doing that. And I just keep telling them, refer to what the ACS says and what the POH for the manufacturer says.
Yeah, so that's what makes it consistent.
Hey, Phil.
Yes.
May I chime in on that as a teaching technique?
Of course.
So for any instructors watching this, and this could apply to other topics as well, but specifically with the short field thing, I totally understand. And I agree that during training, there are times that we need to be practicing the whole short field approach to landing and properly touching down the correct way at the correct point, and hitting the brakes is not the main focus. I get that. My suggestion to all trainers out there is to separate training exercises from short field landings. And basically what I'm saying is, please, let's stop doing a touch and go and calling it a short field landing.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing. That's a total misnomer to say that I'm going to do a short field landing to a touch and go. That makes no sense. What I recommend instead, and you can tell I'm passionate about this because like Jared, I've seen this for a lot of years, simply call it a spot landing. Teach your students, all right, today on the syllabus, it says short field landings, but to be efficient and to save the brakes, we're actually going to do touch and goes. And just so you know what we're talking about, I'm going to call it a spot landing. We're going to do everything the book says for a short field approach. We're going to nail the spot. We're going to do it beautifully with the stall warning horn, the nose nice and high, right on the correct spot. And then we're going to do a touch and go. And we're just going to call it a spot landing. And then after they get good at that, do full stop taxi back or stop and go when you do the short field landing. Mm-hmm. And that's my suggestion. As long as you do that, it takes away all of the confusion. And then they get to the check ride. Like, what are we doing? Short field landing. Oh, of course it's a full stop. Of course I'm going to use brakes.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And the other thing we can add to that is, do they know where the end of the runway is? That helps an awful lot, and it will help them also determine how to modulate their braking so they stop before the end of the
Both ends of the runway. Not everyone focuses on the touchdown. What you're saying is simulate the other end of the runway.
Yes.
Make it, you see that Alpha 5 intersection? That's the end of your runway. Show me you can land this thing.
And brake accordingly.
Yeah, it's called a scenario.
If we got more of that into the training, it would help an awful lot with the braking issues. I get it. I mean, I had a school for a long time and I went through a fair amount of tires. But part of the process is in this environment, it's flight training, and there is an inherent issue with risk. It's even written in the risk management handbook that aviation itself is inherently risky anyway. But we have to get to a point where we actually teach these people in this environment how to stop an airplane properly and not rely on having it happen for real and thinking to themselves, oh, I'm simulating maximum effective braking. We actually need them to do it. Okay, thanks for that input there. Any other? Yeah. Hey, Ben. Ben, we're not getting your audio there. It's skipping a beat. Ben, are you there?
And Ben, if you can hear us, if you go back to Phil's email, there should be a phone number in there. You can call the phone number. It sounds like you're in an area with bad Wi-Fi.
Okay. Brian, are you up? No, I know Todd's not. I just got off the phone with him a little while ago. I was in the middle of a check ride, and Bill Scott can't make it. He's got some issues that he couldn't make it today. Kim, are you on? No. Okay. Any other comments from the POCs?
Phil, this is Kerry. I
Hey,
added one thing I forgot is if you are out there and you're doing approaches and you're denied a request for approach from any of the controlling agencies, please forward me the date and time of the denial so I can go back to P50 and tell them there's a problem.
Got
And
it.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, have not been able to find out anything yet on when each manufacturer actually issued AFMs or POH on those yet. I actually need to, Ernie, if you're still up there, I need to get in touch with you and see how we can find out who did what. So we can see out there which airplanes are supposed to have some sort of a book on board. We've already determined it didn't need to be signed or serial number specific, but the book has to be on there. So I'm still working on that one right there. Systems and equipment malfunctions. We talked about this on the last one. We still have a tendency to test 2 or 3, the standard engine electrical gear. Take the time, and also for the ladies and gentlemen that are at the flight schools, to go through the emergency section and look at some things that aren't necessarily the everyday occurrence, like those 3 things up there, and test on some, or train on some different types of anomalies with the system. I know it's interesting that a lot of the aircraft manufacturers don't have a low oil pressure checklist in them, or low oil pressure anomaly listed in there. And one of the things that I think we can do to get us up to the correlative level is train for something like that and let the pilots try to figure out, well, what is it I need to do with that situation? Of course, one of them is start looking for a place to land instead of waiting for the engine to fail. But I think the low oil pressure, especially this time of year, low oil pressure, high oil temp scenarios are definitely advantageous for them to start thinking, because nothing's written in stone on those things in a lot of manufacturers' checklists, but gives them an opportunity to see that. I've been on a few check rides where the oil temperature was running clear out of sight, low oil pressure. The applicant didn't think anything of it, just said, oh, it always does that. Well, it's going to keep doing it one of these days until it stops doing it. So just food for thought. And also I've noticed that a lot of the CFI applicants I work with were not aware of the amplified procedures in that section. We talked about this the last time too, but it's a good idea to go over that. It actually explains why you're doing all the items on the checklist. And once again, a partial power loss as the scenarios where they have to start thinking as well about, well, can I make it back to the airport? Or this is an example, partial power loss out over the green fields in January at 1800 RPM. You'll make it back to Chandler, no problem, but we won't this time of year. So some more.
And not just can I make it back, but should I make it back if it means flying over 5 miles of houses?
There you go. Exactly. Exactly. Well, there you have an opportunity there to think about, well, Stellar might be my option. Okay, I can land to the north on Stellar without bothering anybody, except for the people that live at Stellar. Any other comments on that? And of course, explain why, the reason for the procedure, which is also in the amplified section right there. And here's a list of different systems and equipment malfunctions that's pulled out of, I think it's the Airplane Flying Handbook, all in one spot. That would be a good gouge for instructors and or examiners to use to kind of mix it up a little bit and get them to understand there's other systems that can fail on the airplane other than those three. Once again, someone asked me again about the data plate references. 4511 is where you find that, not listed as one of our references, but that's where you'll find the reference to the data plate. If you see one that's made out of a label maker or something other than metal, it's not a legitimate data plate. As you see, it has to be fireproof. And most of those kinds of the Dymo label maker thing like that is not fireproof. So make sure that they're understanding they may need to change that. Also, there's a tendency sometimes when an aircraft is painted, that the aircraft painter paints right over it, makes it a little bit more difficult to read. Okay, any issues or problems that we want to bring up? Oh, okay. Anything from a procedure standpoint, how we do some things procedurally? Anything from the technical side? So I know you guys just had your meeting, and was there anything that came out of the AFTW that we also want brought up with those of us that weren't there?
The quick answer is we should have the video posted tonight. Please check it out. We kept it under an hour or right at an hour.
Okay.
But off the top of my head, well, I'll pull up my agenda and I'll look at it. But I think we're hitting the stuff we need to here so far.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments from the professional standpoint?
Did you, Phil, did you hear about Matt Miller?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I don't know if
We
you're
don't
planning on
know
talking about
what
that.
yet. So
Yeah.
I hadn't heard what yet. So we just had 2 incidents the past 4 days. We had the Bonanza attempting to take off, I guess, out of Chandler. I don't know what happened on that one, but it burned pretty good. Fortunately, everybody got out of it. And then the King Air with Matt Miller on board.
This would probably be a good time. Here, let me read you some of the comments. So first of all, thank you, Ryan, for giving the page number. So it's in the both the commercial and the private ACS. It's alpha-9. So page A9 in the appendix is where it talks about the test code that was missed. So the written test code counting is the element that needs to be covered for that task, either knowledge or risk management. So thank you for that reference. And Lisa Hamilton is here with us. She's an instructor / manager over at Lufthansa. She asked about wanting to see the flaps raised on the short field. That was something we talked about a few months ago. Phil, you want to kind of give her the summary of, I'm not sure we came to a consensus, but it was a few good meetings of discussion.
Well, they're using Bonanzas over there still, right?
Well, the Bonanza is an easy one because the manufacturer tells us not to touch the flaps.
That's right. That's
But
right.
they have some planes that are not Bonanzas. Am I right, Lisa? You guys still have some Archers or something?
Cirrus.
Oh, the Cirrus. Does
What?
the Cirrus POH specifically address flaps on the short field? I'm not a CSIP.
No,
So
it does not.
It doesn't say one way or the other then.
No.
Okay, is the reference, is there an expanded version of the short field process? Short field procedure?
I would have to, right off the top of my head, I don't know. We haven't been flying the planes for such a long time and we've had so many other things to do that I've become, the POH has become a little bit foggy in my mind. I can look it up. Do you want me to look it up?
While we're sitting here, that'd be great. Then we can
Okay.
probably get that eliminated. Basically, what we've been saying is that we just follow what the manufacturer recommends. And most of them will not say you will raise the flaps. They say we recommend the retraction of the flaps to get the maximum effective braking. That's how they state it. And of course, aerodynamically, that's true. So that's what our policy was on that. That we just follow what the POH says. I know that there's some instructors that learn a certain way and schools doing it a certain way, but in our efforts to try to get everybody on the same page is to just follow the manufacturer's recommendations. It states that in the ACS that in lieu of the manufacturer's recommendations, just go along with what the FAA airplane flying handbook says. Which,
Okay. Yeah, so sorry, Phil. Yeah, it looks as though I forgot. I forgot what, no, it is in the normal short field landing that you are to, as soon as you've touched down, immediately after touchdown, lower the nose wheel and apply the braking as required. So like you guys said earlier, apply the brakes first, and then for maximum brake effectiveness, retract the flaps and hold the control yoke full back. I apologize. It is in there for the series.
that's why we do this.
That's right. Good, thank you.
So if I may add, Phil, what I remember from those discussions, one thing that came out of it, I was always very black and white, like, hey, it says it in the POH, that's what we do, end of story. Part of what came out of the discussion is we do not have clear direction from the FAA that says that if an applicant does everything else very well, I won't say perfect, but they do everything else very well, meaning they drain out the energy, they get a nice high pitch attitude, the stall warning horns go and they touch down at minimum speed on the center line, on their pointer within 200 feet, and they don't retract the flaps, even though the POH recommends it, the examiner does have the discretion to still say that that's a pass. And kind of a consensus that I remember is that we were basically saying, that really should be more of a debrief item as long as everything else was within standards and they still actually stop short. Like we were saying before, they get on the brakes, they stop within, X number of feet, like, wow, that was a short landing. Then it, it's not necessarily a failure item is the point. But hey guys, let's all just do what the POH says and there's no argument.
Yeah, and just to throw one other wrench in the works, we don't really know if the data, the ground roll that you're reading off the chart to determine how much of a ground roll you're going to have, is that based on the flaps being retracted or not being retracted? And it would help if they'd mention that, because that would really make it easy. The way I see it, ultimately, did the applicant stop before you told him where the end of the runway was? Did he stop the airplane before that? How he got to it, whether he raised the flaps or didn't raise the flaps? Did he stop or did she stop the aircraft prior to the point without any dramatic braking or gyrations? That's really what we should be looking at. It's not so much because they get, you can tell I'm getting tensed up. They all get all tensed up. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, it's going to save you some ground roll. But the thing of it is, and I have not been able to find out because the people that generated those charts are probably long gone by now. But were those things based on raising the flaps for maximum effective braking or not? I have a feeling that they were based on not raising the flaps because it doesn't state anything otherwise. It just says for maximum effective braking. It doesn't say to meet the criteria of the charts, you need to raise the flaps. Okay.
Excellent. Good answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Well, we don't have any mentoring going on right now. Anybody want to throw in any scenario triggers or
Well,
Action item.
Phil,
Yes, there's Ben. Okay.
I'm back. Okay, I got two things. One is with respect to the braking, it's the reason they say they don't want to do it is the exact reason why they need to be doing it. That we need to learn to teach pilots how to use the brake so that we don't have pilot induced maintenance. So teach them. So that's the thing. The new subject matter that I'd like to talk about and put on the forefront is declaring an emergency, Mayday, and Pon.
You got cut out there a second, Ben. Go ahead and say that last part again.
The terminology and the use of declaring an emergency, Pon, Mayday.
Yes.
Real quick, David C., if you could mute out, we're getting some bad feedback coming from your station.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has happened and happens routinely is that pilots do not say the magic words.
Awesome.
Mayday. Once you say those magic words, the world stops, everybody listens, and you have the mic. The controllers respond, etc. If you say Pon, the same thing happens. If you say, hey, I'm not making power, that doesn't get anybody's attention. You'll get ignored. If we, in a recent accident where the guys in the 737 off of Honolulu, the controller didn't give them, in my opinion, due diligence because they never said, hey, Mayday. And it took her a while before she acknowledged that they were in trouble. Would that have changed the outcome? Who knows? But it's an example of making the call. Don't be afraid of making the call. Maydays are free, Pons are free. It also lets you know that, keep in mind that the controller can declare an emergency on your behalf and does not have to report that to you. So you have a bad running engine, you return to land because you have a bad running engine. Everything's good. You push the airplane back in the hangar. Maintenance looks at it. You get a phone call a few days later from a maintenance inspector that says, hey, tell me about this emergency you declared the other day. And you go, I didn't declare an emergency. Now that inspector thinks that you are hiding something. Whereas, look, I declared an emergency. Everything landed great. Hey, I got some paperwork to fill out. You make your phone call and say, hey, this is what happened. You're going to get an attaboy from the office and we're done. That's so much better than not having declared and needing the assistance and not getting the help that you properly need. So Pon, Mayday, say those magic words. We can when you're squared away and it's not and turn off the Mayday later. But just saying we've got to say those magic words because it cues everybody on the frequency. Shut up. Somebody's got a problem.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, that's brings up a good point. Along with these malfunctions, systems, equipment, and malfunctions, and we always get the emergency approach and landing, which should generate a Mayday if you have the time. Is people are so concerned about paperwork. There really isn't any paperwork. If you declared a Mayday or a Pan, there's no paperwork involved unless it created some sort of an issue. I mean, at the airlines, I probably had 8 or 9, emergency declarations. And the thing of it is that once my problem was over with on 3 or 4 of them, you simply undeclare the emergency. You said, we're no longer an emergency aircraft. End of story. Go on your way, land and get off and go to the hotel. But it's not fully understood or trained correctly as to what exactly that does for you, because a lot of times, and I'm hoping to get a air traffic controller that I just did some CFI training for, get him reinstated, who was TRACON here for a long time, to explain what it does for the controller. It lifts a huge amount of weight off their shoulders because they don't have to play by the rules anymore either. And as soon as you declare that, all bets are off. Distances between aircraft are shortened. All kinds of other policies are no longer in effect to deal with the emergency aircraft, and they prefer it. And that's why, like I said, Ben, sometimes the controllers will declare it and you don't know anything about it, but there's no reason not to. Even if you're lost and you want somebody to help you out, that's an emergency to some people. Getting lost, you could conceivably end up in really bad shape, running out of gas, hitting some terrain. But I think the part of the problem is that it's not trained very well by the group.
Well,
that it's not a bad thing to declare it. You can undeclare it, and it doesn't necessarily generate paperwork.
if we test it, they will train it. So, such as instrument check ride, primary flight display failure. Most of the time, I get people that say, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm going to continue. I'm going to report that," and maybe they'll say, "Okay, I'm going to report the failure." And I go, "Are you declaring an emergency?" And they go, "Nope." And me personally, that's a pawn.
Mhm.
And I've been debriefing that at length, and I think that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up to the social consciousness here about declaring a Mayday. Declare it.
Yes. And this is part of the other problem is that understanding the difference between pon and mayday.
Well, is Bobby Baldock on the line,
No, I don't think so.
or O'Shaughnessy?
Neither one of them.
Yeah. Mayday, somebody's going to die. Pon, somebody could get hurt.
Yes. And the understanding between distress and urgency should be trained as well. That's right out of the AIM. In a section of the AIM, not too many people look at, but that would help too, and they understand what they're saying to somebody. But it doesn't hurt. If you want to say Mayday, fine, say Mayday. You're the pilot command. You're supposed to show that and demonstrate that. The fact that we may not think it's a Mayday is kind of irrelevant. That pilot thinks it's a Mayday or a pan.
So Ben, I don't know where your accent's from, but for 27 years, I thought it was pan. Am I the only one? Is it really pon? Is this like potato?
Yeah.
No, it's actually, if you look at the phonetic of it, it's pawn. Coast Guard calls it pawn.
I never even noticed that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's actually, I think it's a French word that means something
like bread. Yeah, like bread, pawn. But
yeah, no, not that kind of pawn. No, it's a French word that means something. I can't remember what it said, but it means something in regards to urgency or distress. It's a French.
Either way, if you say pan or pawn, everybody understands that, whether or not, like you say, potato, but most correctly, It's pawn.
Yeah.
I thought it meant possible.
It's French and it means breakdown.
What's that, Lee?
I thought it
It
meant
means
possible
breakdown.
assistance needed.
Hey, pilot, what? Yeah, pilot assistance needed.
Possible assistance needed.
That's another one of it. Another the definitions of it.
I learned PAN, P-A-N.
Yeah.
Pan.
Either one of those is going to get somebody's attention.
Correct.
When
That's-
when I was flying in Europe, you'd hear the RAF on the radio all the time on guard going practice pan. So they used it for practicing emergencies and they called it pan as well.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, if that's all we run into today is pan or pon, I'm happy.
No kidding.
Yeah. Okay. Great input, Ben. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
I got another trigger for you real quick.
You betcha.
Or just a little scenario. It's specific to the G1000 Cessnas, but we've got a few of those around here. And something I've kind of massaged my scenario into recently that I'm going to keep doing because it's interesting to see. And like Ben said, if you test it, they'll learn it. So talking about the electrical system and the main battery versus the standby battery, all my applicants have always been good at understanding what's on the essential bus and what they have if they lose their main battery and they're running off the standby battery. What I'd recommend to instructors is don't just focus on what I do have, but turn it into a real life scenario. And sometimes I'll just simply ask, okay, here we are this far in this scenario. What is it that you think is important that we don't have? And it's interesting to see, I'm not trying to give them a tricky question, but it's interesting to see the look on their face like, I never thought of that, you know? And specifically for the Cessnas, different manufacturers do this different, but for the, as you guys know, transponder, I think is kind of important if we're really in the clouds instrument scenario and we either purposely or you know, automatically we stop using the main battery and go to the standby battery, we're going to lose radar contact. That has all kinds of other, you know, ramifications. And then the flaps, I think that's the safety thing. You know, most of these applicants are learning to fly approaches down to minimums at 90 knots. Imagine coming out of the clouds at 200 feet, going 90 knots in a 172 and you don't have any flaps. That's going to require a lot of runway to land that thing. And, you know, I think instructors should be going out and demonstrating that, you know, see what happens, see how much runway it really takes to land that airplane if you don't have any flaps. And so that's something that needs to be thought of before you get to 200 feet and adjust accordingly or go to an airport with a longer runway and those kinds of things. So that's just,
That's
worth.
It's a good point. And one of the other things that we used to do was we'd ask that or give them that scenario, Jim, okay, you've lost your electrical system. And I would ask them to point to the engine instruments and tell me what you don't have anymore. Not what you have. They'll tend to memorize that stuff. But like you said, we tend to not pay attention to what we don't have. Good example is on the Seminole, on the newer Seminoles. If you lose your electrical system, you don't have a tachometer. The tachs are electric on that airplane. And the way I show that is turn the master switch on and you'll see the needles jump. Turn the master switch off, you'll see the needles jump. Hey, I had no idea. I said, I know you thought you had a tachometer. You're 100% manifold pressure. And of course, that won't go away because it's not powered that way. But it would be beneficial to give someone an electrical scenario and have them take it all the way to the ground in a scenario, probably verbally. You're not going to probably do it in a real airplane, maybe, unless you are setting up for the emergency approach and landing. And you want them to land without flaps, which is perfectly fine. Nobody says we have to land with flaps, you know, on the normal landings. You can do whatever you want. But that's a good point, is they don't really understand what they don't have. Also, the benefit of the LED lights, everybody wants to turn the lights off if they have an electrical failure at nighttime. Those lights use about 2 amps. They used to use about 20. But most of the LEDs now, they use maybe 2 or 3 amps. They use hardly anything. So before we consider turning, you know, making ourselves dark at night when we have that kind of a problem, we might want to be seen by other people, might want other people to help us. And the only way they're going to see us is if we turn the lights on. So those are the things that we cover too in the electrical system. And along those lines too, is I'll ask somebody what the ammeter should be reading right after you start an engine, let's say on the Cessna. And they actually don't know. They don't know, you know, because you don't look at the ammeter, you look at the oil pressure, but you don't look at the ammeter. I said, well, I can tell right now we're going to end up losing all of our electricity because that alternator never kicked in. Well, how'd you know that? It's because of what the ammeter is doing or not doing. So things like that to help with the electrical system. Good stuff. Any other questions or comments from the DPEs, and then we'll put the guests out there. This is how many questions I got from the DPEs for this meeting. Okay.
You're still getting some background noise, Phil. I don't know if you're able to pull up the participants list, but as the host, you should be able to mute them.
Yeah, I think that might be Mr. Kitts. Get it. Let me do that for now. There we go. Sorry, David. Okay. Let's see. I talked about Carrie's items. We already covered that. Those are the items right there that Carrie had mentioned to me. He already covered those items right there. No reports from the committees, admin, communication, membership, or the alliances we just talked about, the AFTW. I haven't heard anything from the other teams. Craig, do you have anything from the FAST team?
Negative, Phil.
Okay. Anything else from the FSDO side of it?
So is that a typo or did the POG lose Phoenix?
Oh,
Is it the Phoenix Airspace Users Working Group?
That's a typo.
Okay. Yeah, maybe they expanded. I don't know.
That's a typo. Yeah. Anything else from the FSDO, from any of our FSDO, ladies and gentlemen?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. There aren't any ongoing programs that I know of right now. I think, what's the next one? The CFI of the year or something like that? What's the next one that's coming up? Anybody?
Well,
know?
we do at the end of the year have the awards program, which is going to include, the CFI and air traffic control, all the usual things.
Sure.
I haven't really hit too hard on it yet, just being this time of year.
Right. Okay.
But hey, everybody keep it in mind. Everybody keep it in mind. If there's somebody out there who didn't have any nominations at all for CFI last year, so be thinking about it, please.
Okay. Guests, any questions or comments from our guests? I better unmute David.
Jim, should I ask the question I asked in the airspace in the other earlier meeting?
Fine with me.
I'm Mike. I'm from Southern California. I'm not an Arizona guy, although I do fly in Arizona quite a bit. But I saw some stats recently that talked about how many DPEs in our area how many check rides are given by a DPE from out of the area. In other words, there's nobody in your district to give the check ride, or for some reason, an out of district DPE is coming in and giving that check ride. I was just curious what those numbers look like in Arizona as a general rule, if there is one.
Do you mean how many of our Arizona people go out of the area?
Or have an examiner from outside the area come in?
Yeah, I'm not privy to that information myself. But
And we already asked Craig and he didn't have it handy. That's not something that they really track. But
the numbers I saw were,
the
number I saw was basically a complete turnaround in the last 2 years. That in 2018, which I believe was the last full year before DPEs were allowed to do exams outside their district. And it was about 3/4 of the exams were locals, and 1/4 was done by out-of-district DPEs. And now it appears that's completely flipped, and it's about 1/4 are now in district and 3/4 are out of district.
Okay.
And meanwhile, we've got a lot of instructors who are highly qualified, would like to become DPEs, and it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. That part of that may be due to the COVID issue. So, matter of fact, I would bet that that's a big part of it right now.
Maybe a big part of it. I'm in the Long Beach district, and we've had a shortage of DPEs for a long time. I haven't talked about it I'm not a full-time instructor, but I've talked with my full-time instructor friends, and they have for years now been talking about easily a 2, sometimes a 3-month wait for a practical test. And so that's been that way for a long time. In one case, I know of 2 people who have had their applications in to become DPEs for a long time. One of them has had an application in for 33 years. And again, highly, highly qualified pilot, pretty well known, actually. You probably know who he is, but can't get off a bottom dead center to get through the DPE process. And in fact, I think he's basically given up on it.
Yeah, I wish I could give you some more information on that, but that's totally out of our, our realm.
And I was just curious if you had any anecdotal idea of how many check rides, how long the wait is for check rides in Arizona, and how many are done from outside. So.
Well, how long you wait depends on some of the check rides that you're doing. And in other words, the CFI check rides
sure
have a longer wait time. And not all the DPEs are qualified to do private instrument commercial.
Sure, but even private pilot check rides are taking many weeks to months to book around here, and it just doesn't seem right. While we've got people who want to be DPEs and can't become DPEs.
Right. No, I understand the frustration. But no answer.
I think I just make one comment on that, and And that is the FAA is going to look at when that 8710 was time stamped in IACRA to the time that the check ride takes place. And that's how they determine how long it takes from the check ride request to it being, to the check ride being done. And I think sometimes people get confused on that too. They might say, well, my applicant's been waiting for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And if the FAA looks at it and the 8710 was signed yesterday and the check ride takes place today, they're going to say, well, no, it only took you 1 day. What do you mean? So.
And I think that's from my perspective, again, I'm not a full-time instructor. I don't do a lot of recommendations personally, but I think that's a ridiculous way to do it because in most cases, or at least in many cases, I think the applicant doesn't complete the 8710 until they've got a check ride booked. Mm-hmm. So. Right.
It might be, yeah, it might not be agreeable, but that's the way that they do it. So
it's good to know.
Yeah,
Thanks for that.
Yeah, if you want to complain about the length of time it takes, that may be a legitimate complaint. I would just suggest sign the applicant off in IACRA, and then you can point to it and say, well, look, it took us 3 weeks or something, and it'll be there on record.
That's a great idea. That's very useful information. Thanks for that. And I will spread the word.
Yeah, what happens on that is the schools or the instructors will tend to work backwards. So they'll get a check ride schedule when they think their student is ready. They still have some more boxes, squares to fill. And then of course, most of the time, the application, I prefer to see it 2 days before I show up. So I have an opportunity to see anything, catch anything that might need to be changed before we start. Look at endorsements and stuff, but that's common is that if a person is ready, they're done to sign the IACRA at that part, knowing it might be 3 or 4 weeks. Well, now you may be running into an issue of your 2 calendar months, having your 3 hours in there, depending on when you did it. So characteristically, Mike, the application is signed just days before the check ride, and sometimes the day before.
Yeah, there's one I know of coming up. The check ride is booked on Thursday. The applicant is completely ready to go, but the 8710 is not. They're kind of just waiting for some, I don't know what they're waiting for, but they could do it today, but they're waiting until tomorrow, I think, and the check ride is Thursday.
Right.
Okay, this is Phil. Wasn't there just a constituent study on all of this, and the FAA, it's my understanding, just published, and it's not out to the public yet, but they're looking at overhauling that system. And they've had a lot of input from the industry and the participants, and I think there's something that's coming real quick, isn't it?
That I don't know of.
I just read it in one of the major publications in the last 3 days. So
I think you're referring to that advisory group report that supposedly
Yes.
wasn't supposed to be put out. So that's in the chat. If you go to the chat, I already shared the link at the beginning of today's meeting.
Okay.
For anyone who's looking for that. And yeah, hopefully that's going to lead to some positive changes.
Right.
And Mike, I think I meant to mention this if I didn't in the last meeting, that you can go to that document and pick one or more of the people who are on that committee and just reach out to them personally, make sure they know what's happening in the Long Beach area.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know about that document. I have it now, and I will do a little light reading on that 100+ page document here this afternoon, or my next trip to Asia or something.
Okay, I'm just going through some of the chats here to see if there's anything I needed to address here that we didn't cover. All right, any other comments from our guests? Here's your chance to let us have it. Nothing? Okay. The next meeting will be September 14th, 2021. Not planning one in August unless something comes up. But characteristically, a lot of people aren't even around here. And even though it's a Zoom thing, probably don't want to be taking the time up in the mountains to attend a meeting for a couple hours. So the next one is planned for September 14th unless we think something else needs to come up.
And that'll be 2 p.m. again?
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
It's always, for planning purposes, it's the second Tuesday of the month at 2 o'clock, our time. That's when they always run. Okay, any other comments, questions? Nope. Okay. Thanks for participating, and you can email me with any comments. That's my email address right there. We now have a DPEG email I'll get as well, at AZDPEAG@gmail.com. Yes, comment?
As your truck getting worked on. I guess we had, I don't know what DW
Nope,
said.
just background noise.
Said both of this double eyes quit.
Okay.
Saying that DW said they need to find another school or something.
Yeah, I guess.
Or
that-
maybe because they were told they weren't getting students, who knows?
I think he's on another call.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your summer.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Great job as always.
You bet.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks.
Thanks, Phil.